Rebecca's got to hit the record button.
We're recording now, so go ahead.
All right, so let's do a quick roll call, and we'll just, let's see, I see Paul, Allison, Bethany, Leslie, Melanie, Katie, Sam, Stephanie, Tim, Gina, Christy, Monique, Isabella, Nia, and Rebecca. Well, of course, Rebecca's always here. So can I get approval of the current minutes for this meeting? A motion to
approve.
I second that.
Okay. So Rebecca, any public comments?
No public comments. And could you just tell me who approved it and who seconded that agenda?
Who was the motion? Who made the
Leslie
motion?
was the motion.
It was Leslie.
Leslie and Nia.
Thank you.
Yep.
So, all right, Tim, or whoever's covering the equity audit discussions, go ahead and take away.
Right. So
Do we
yes,
have to have
Leslie.
do we have to have approval of the agenda?
And I think new people showed up.
Okay, so we did an approval of the minutes. Brian, let's do number
So let's-
4.
All right, so let's do approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion?
So moved. Tim?
Second?
I'll second.
Sam, second? And who just came on?
Me.
Melissa Hernandez, all right.
And we had Pam Potter and Mike Pisani, Michelle Berg, and Rebecca, did you have Nia on the first time through?
I had Nia.
Okay,
So from future, if you come in after roll call, just when you find an opportunity, announce your presence when you come into the meeting, so. All right, Tim, go ahead and take it away.
okay, thank you, Brian. So our plan for this evening on the agenda is to really focus on advancing our equity audit work, review where we've been, revisit some of the items still outstanding in criteria 2, and then have a committee conversation about our future roadmap so we can be as effective as possible in carrying this work to conclusion, because it is core foundational work. And I am just, I have to say, I'm so appreciative of our internal team that's working hard on the equity audit. And this thing wouldn't be moving without all of your efforts, and you're doing this in a time where you have so many other demands. And just a big thank you, to Gina, Allison, Bethany, you've been involved. I don't want to be guilty of omitting. Katie, you've been heavily involved. Gina, who am I leaving out?
Mel.
Mel, I'm sorry, Mel. Yes, and Mel too. I mean, this thing wouldn't be rolling without your efforts. And so we do have an updated slide deck, and
I'll
Gina,
pull it up.
you'll pull it up. And Gina, is it you or Allison that's going to be the facilitator for the most part in this section?
I will kick us off.
Thank you, Gina.
Sure. All right. So I will just, before I make a mess of this, I'm going to just put the slides in case it's easier for anybody into the chat quick, because we did not send them in advance. So here they are. Okay. So as Tim said, we decided, largely because our last discussion here together was that we would survey staff about criteria 3. And just with the mayhem that is right now in our schools, we are postponing that a bit just to allow for the best response. And so we decided as a team that we would finish up 1 and 2 so that we have kind of a fresh start. So I did not clear these with people. So if people would agree to the tasks that we have assigned you, that would be great. We're looking for Mike to monitor Zoom hands, and Mel, are you available to monitor the chat?
Yep, and if Mike's not here, I can do the hands and chat.
Okay, perfect.
I can do the hands.
Thank you, Katie.
Okay, great. And then Nia, are you willing to be our timekeeper again?
Absolutely.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, so we'll just get right into it. I'll speed through all of the review, and then we've got some new information that people have requested for criteria 1 and 2, and then we will vote and hopefully place those on the continuum. And then, as Tim said, we'll make a plan for how to move forward. So I believe Allison is going to take us through a couple of these.
Thanks, Gina. Good evening. This is just a reminder of our norms. If you, Gina, do you mind maybe just opening them up quick? And I ask that you just review them, take a minute to review them. And if based on what we are going to be working through tonight, if you can just pick one that you want to be mindful of and hold on to during our work this evening. So I'll just give you a minute to look those over.
Okay.
Thank you. And something I wanted to add into, I know at Prairie staff meetings, we always have a parking lot. And so a parking lot is kind of like a place that we hold if something comes up from our conversations tonight that leads us into like a different avenue. And so that we can stay focused on getting through our planned work tonight. If something comes to mind, if you don't mind just jotting it down on like a sticky note or a piece of paper. And then at the end, if anything additional comes up in addition to the criteria and the elements we're looking at tonight, we can check in with everyone on that. Just again, to be mindful of the work we're trying to get through this evening. So as Tim and Gina mentioned, we are going to be going back to our criteria 1. There's just one element within there connected to like 4K and kindergarten transitions. And then with element 2 or criteria 2, there's 3 elements within there that we are going to be relooking at. So as a team, we kind of identified people within the district that we could talk to, or Tim, I know too, has a wealth of knowledge that he is able to share specifically about some of the things tonight too. So we're gonna just start by giving you answering some of the questions that were brought to us when we tried to look at these originally. So again, this just shows we're relooking at 1E and then as well as 2C and D. And also as a reminder, this is just the overview of the continuum of how we're responding to the elements. So again, if you just want to take, or if we don't need to relook at it, that's okay. Just take a,
it seems like people are pretty comfortable, so.
Right, I was gonna say, we can just get right into it. So the first part that I looked into a little bit more, was the information connected to criteria 1E, which specifically is our school has a funded plan to ensure successful transition from early learning programs to elementary school. And the plan is aligned with state early learning standards. So as a reminder, and at the top, all 4K sites in our district follow the early learning standards, which is the 5th edition of Wisconsin's model of early learning standards as identified by the Wisconsin DPI. So any public 4K programs in the state of Wisconsin, this is the curriculum, the standards that they are following. So I checked with Sheila Wyatt, who is in charge of our summer school program for the district. She's also the Arboretum principal, as well as Amy Johnson, who is considered the 4K principal that oversees all the sites. She's also the K-6 curriculum and instruction coordinator. So who is attending Camp Kindergarten? So Sheila shared that 90% of our eligible population attends Camp Kindergarten. So Camp Kindergarten is a program through summer school. It is free to all Waunakee residents, and it is a way to get students ready for attending kindergarten. It gets them used to the building, it gets them used to the playground, it gives them an idea of routines that might be happening, and it's just a fun way to get them acclimated to the idea of attending kindergarten. So it's very well attended. I think I mentioned it's free because of the funding through our summer school program. And it's offered at all 3 elementary school sites. And it's 3 weeks long, so they can either pick like the first 3 weeks of the program or the second 3 weeks of the program. And then the next part, how is Camp Kindergarten communicated to families? Information is communicated through the 4K sites. It's shared in the spring, which will be coming up next week. They have parent-teacher conferences in 4K, so it's shared by the teachers that way. Our elementary schools also have a welcome to kindergarten night that is actually coming up in April that we're still committed to hosting this year, at this point virtually, but that information is shared and made available to parents of how to sign up for it and how to get involved with it. And then as far as what information is shared between teachers as they transition from 4K to kindergarten, we have a program for placing students into classes. It's called Class Creator. All 3 elementary schools are using that program now. And it takes, so the 4K teachers actually fill out the information about the incoming kindergarten students. And so it gives social information about insight about students' academic background. And then as the kindergarten teachers get their class list, they have access to this information that's coming in from the 4K teachers. There's also, we use what's called PALS, which is our early literacy screener for the state of Wisconsin. And it starts in 4K. We also administer it in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. But the 4K data is passed along as well to the kindergarten teachers, so they have access to it. It's housed in our district's information system that's called EduClimber. So it's a computer-based access that all teachers have to getting that information. And then what is the plan to transition students from 4K to kindergarten? Students that have IEPs, they have case managers, so they help to transition them. They help with Camp Kindergarten as well as kindergarten. Additionally, the family night, which is the welcome to kindergarten, which is in the spring before kindergarten starts. So that's just another way to transition them and starting to get them ready for the kindergarten experience. And then we also have supply drop-off night, which is like an open house. And I know the kindergarten classes, for the other older grades, it's kind of just like an open time that they can come in during any window. But with kindergarten, they have them sign up for a specific kind of window of time. So there's a smaller group of families there at a time, and it's not so overwhelming for the students. And then just a couple other things, how our families, like the 4K experience, how are families able to give feedback? So Amy Johnson shared that she conducts an annual survey of families to gauge feedback on a variety of different issues, and that helps her with planning with the site coordinators going forward. As far as translating to make sure that it's reaching all of our 4K families, because 4K is a district funded program, the district translation services are used when the support is needed. So Amy shared that currently we have 2 families this year that require translation services, and they're able to get that through our district translation. And then just some other highlights that I thought would be interesting to pass along, as far as making sure that we're reaching the families in our community to make sure that they're aware of even just the 4K program. It was shared that all of our social workers and the JFF, which is our county social worker that we're connected with, are aware of the district's 4K program. So as they might be doing any home visits, that is a way for them to share with families about the 4K program. The community childcare sites that help provide childcare for students before 4K always have information about the 4K program. You might have noticed in the community, there's yard signs placed in random places kind of around high traffic areas to promote the 4K registration. And then I thought it was also interesting to note that there's annual professional development that is done with our district ELs teachers on like a professional development day, and the 4K teachers. So even if a 4K teacher had that professional development one year, they're still a part of it every year on an annual basis. The belief and practice with the 4K program is that students, like EL students, should have full immersion, that they shouldn't be pulled out to be receiving extra support with EL service teams. So they're fully immersed in the program. They can the EL staff from the schools are able to provide and consult as needed if something comes up.
And then
Yeah,
just
thank you for that
clarify,
question.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's English learners. So
Sorry about that. Thank you for asking that. So that's kind of just, I know it's a lot of information to share about that, but I just wanted to make sure we kind of highlighted and circled back to some of the questions that were raised. And I know it's hard to think back to when that came up, probably a few months ago now, but are there any questions or about this information?
So we did specifically seek this information because our notes indicated that these are things that people had questions about.
Monique has her hand raised.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Allison, for this very nice review of the 4K program. And speaking for myself on the EL English language team, I just want to clarify that a lot of the success of getting kids enrolled into that program is because we have really pushed to have our translation and interpretation team active with this. This is not a program that families just know about because they live in Waunakee. A parking lot issue is summer school, same issue. We could come back to that another time if you'd like to ask me about it. These programs are important for our students. They come from families that we really need them involved in these programs, but they don't just know about them. They might see these signs, but the families need to be contacted. They need to be explained the program, and most of them enroll their kids. That's not the issue, but it doesn't just magically happen. It is a lot of work, and Elena Walter is the one at our high school that does the ELL professional development for them. That's a one-time program that she does each year with those teachers. And I can't say that we get like a whole lot of outreach from them, the teachers coming and asking for more assistance, but we are available if they need it. And, you know, we do our best to get them prepared for kindergarten because that's another big step ahead from there. So that whole transition to kindergarten is another issue that definitely could be parking lot for summer school enrollment. So thank you.
Thank you, Monique. And I know I appreciate your perspective too with your support with that population of students. So thank you. Are there any other questions or comments specifically connected to this information?
I see two hands up. Was it Mike first and then Diane?
Go ahead, Mike.
This may be a parking lot question, but the 10% that aren't showing up at the getting ready for kindergarten, what's the makeup of that group? Is it mostly white? Is it, does it match the natural proportions of our student population for that 10%?
Mm-hmm.
Great question. Does anyone know that offhand?
I know I
I
asked
also,
for a breakdown because it's a free, or like with it being a free program. Sheila shared she is not, like they're not able to track like the free and reduced population with it being summer school. We can definitely work to get more information. Unfortunately, I think the timing with everything that's been going on the past few days as we were working on this, I'll be honest that it was hard to get more specific information, but I think that I wrote that down, that's definitely something that could be looked into more.
And
totally
Allison,
understandable. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mike.
I was just gonna say totally understandable, and thank you for taking the question.
And Allison, if it would be possible for Sheila to get an extract on a CSV or an Excel doc or even a Google doc, can do a match on first name, last name. If it has the student number, that would make it much easier as a unique identifier. But we could backwards map that I could backwards map that pretty easily and generate some summary demographic data.
Great, thank you.
You'll
And
And then
so I
there-
think just before we take the other hand, we could consider if we have enough information to place on the continuum, and then certainly keep in mind that these placements on along the continuum are just our first step, right? They're to figure out which areas we need to dive deeper into. And so I would suggest that we keep that in mind if as we're determining whether we're ready to make a call on this, or if the questions are enough that we need to have added follow-up. Okay, the other hand was,
The other hand was, oh, they must have put their hand down.
It was me, and Mike asked my question.
Oh, great.
So I'm all good.
There is a question in the chat asking about transportation for camp kindergarten. Does anybody know if kids can get transported?
Yes, it's like normal summer school.
great.
So anybody who would qualify for transportation in a typical school year would qualify for transportation in camp kindergarten.
And I do know, like last summer, it was a modified program. We were still able to bring some students in through camp kindergarten. This upcoming summer, we are planning for our regular programming with camp kindergarten at all 3 sites.
So I thought it would be best to go ahead and conclude criteria 1 before we introduce the additional information for criteria 2. Does that sound like a plan? That was a switcheroo of my own, so I just wanted to check. Is that okay? Great. So then just as a way to simplify it tonight, we have already voted, so we're just going to take a peek at what the original votes were. And again, remember, it doesn't matter what you voted originally. We'll just use that as a starting point. And then we will follow our general process about just seeing if we're comfortable making a placement and then doing fist to 5. So here is that element of criteria 1. Part E, our school has a funded plan to ensure successful transition from elementary learning programs to elementary school, and the plan is aligned with state early learning standards. So this one was kind of all over the place, but if anyone wants to speak to, let's see, we didn't have any don't exist. Not apparent or emerging, we can start there. Does anyone have any?
Gina, did you want me to time this for 10 minutes? I just wasn't 100%
Yes,
sure.
thank
Okay.
you.
Yep.
Thank you. So with the information we were presented, is there anyone who still feels that this is not apparent or emerging that would like to speak to that? Okay. We did have a majority the first time around in improving, but if people are moving,
Gina?
yes,
I'm sorry, I think Diane's put up her hand.
okay. Go ahead, Diane.
I'll watch hands for this section.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I'm using a phone today, so if I have a really funny angle on my face, I apologize. So my only reservation, let me just ask a quick question. What is the total kindergarten population, just sort of median across the years? Incoming class, how many people could be participating, for example, in camp kindergarten?
Oh, I'm not sure I know that answer. I can tell you at Prairie, we typically have 5 sections of kindergarten, with each section ranging between about 18 to 21 kids, depending on the class size.
I can tell that it's usually about 275 average for that.
Okay. Okay.
About 275. Look at you, Rebecca. Thank
right.
you.
So, perfect. So that means about 27 children aren't participating. And so that seems like that's really good participation. So my only concern is if that 27 students isn't reflective of the total population, then I might feel more like it's emerging versus, that it's improving or something like that. So that's the only thing. I'm not quite sure how to answer that.
Okay. And so, again, this whole element, the camp kindergarten part is part of it. So we have identified that we do
Yeah.
want to collect more information on that specific data point. And just keeping in mind that this is the whole transition from any pre-K to kindergarten and early elementary school. So Diane, would you say
Understood.
that this that information that we're still missing would lead you to classify it in a certain way?
I hear what you're saying of there's a lot of other elements, and it sounds like, there's really good outreach for students that are English learners. And so it sounds like there's a lot of pieces in place. And hopefully those 10 students are, sort of just, they're on vacation or something like that. And, they're reflective of the total population. I think I would be leaning towards, I got to look at my,
So not
I think I would be
emerging, improving, and flourishing.
Yeah, I think I would be leaning towards the improving now, considering that, but just, would be good to know, because I don't know to the extent that camp kindergarten is a really important engaging element that is sort of really important to the, students' sort of social integration and academic. I might be giving it too much thought.
Yeah.
So I'll stop talking now.
There's no
Not at
doubt
all.
there's
No.
value to it.
I just wanted to add to just a note that camp kindergarten, even though it's highly recommended, like it is a choice for families. And I know, like Diane mentioned, like some could possibly be on vacation, or, maybe they go to a cottage or something in the summer, like that they're not able to be there, or due to childcare situations. So just something to think about too, that it's an optional piece.
Nia, could you tell us how much time we have remaining?
6 minutes.
Okay. So Diane mentioned that she's leaning towards improving. Hearing nobody else that we heard in the non-apparent and emerging. Would anybody like to speak to the distinction between improving, emerging, or flourishing?
So I see Pam's hand up, and I'm not sure if Diane's hand is her previous hand or a new hand, but we'll go to Pam.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate the point that was just raised, that I remember when my daughter was eligible for camp kindergarten, we had to get special permission from her daycare provider to let her be absent for those 3 weeks. So there are all kinds of, and also vacations, camps, all those kinds of things as well. I think 90% is a really strong number. And I would also, but to get into the improving category, I'd like to know, do we have any idea what the participation has been over the last few years, if actually the participation, the percentage has improved over the last few years?
I'm going to take us back to that distinction, because that is a strange word. I would agree. Improving, remember, on the continuum doesn't necessarily mean that there is like an upward trajectory. By definition, one would think, but it simply is the distinction between there's emerging, just getting started, improving is a notch above that, and then flourishing is, wow, look at us. So I don't know if that clarification is helpful, but I know that word is maybe misleading there as well. Do we know, Allison or anyone else, if there has been a change recently that is actually improving from my
I do not
experiences
have
with
the
case
specific,
study.
I put that down as a note that I can definitely ask for more historical data, like from year to year, the numbers.
Okay.
Because I think that would be definitely interesting to find out too.
So in order of hands, Brian raised his hand. Then Leslie raised her hand, and Pam, your hand is still up. Is that a follow-on? Because it's a follow-on, we want to get to you first.
And Tim, I think Mike puts people's hands down. So maybe
Oh,
if you have that power, then we can clarify
let
that.
me see if I can.
Well, I'll just add one other thing. I see that improving is not what I thought it was, but I do see from the time that my daughter was in camp kindergarten, there
Right.
seems to be a vast improvement because you actually have it at all 3 schools. When she did it, it was only at the one school where she actually was not attending. So, but again,
So maybe
thank you
in
for the
multiple
clarification
senses of the
about,
words.
yeah, but thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
I don't think I have the ability to lower the hands.
Okay. I will check to see if I do.
But we can lower our own
Special.
hands. So.
Okay.
Brian, then Leslie.
We're
Yeah, I
at
guess
2
I had to.
minutes, just to let everyone know. Thank you.
Thank you, Nia. I guess my question is, how do we define eligible? Are we going from the number
Total
that
kindergarten enrollees. So those who will attend
enrollees?
kindergarten. Yep.
Okay, so yes, we also have probably 50 homes that change over the summer before school starts. So some of those kids will be enrolling, but they're just not in town yet. So I think 90% is excellent for all the factors that can come into a family over the summer before school. So, all right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Go ahead, Leslie.
Yeah, I am going to give this improving, but I will say that I didn't personally have a very good experience because, again, I registered my son at the time who was going into who was actually going into kindergarten. I was never informed. Our family was never informed. And so, somehow or another, that communication did fall through the cracks because we were here in the spring. And that's where, I getting an understanding of where the program stands now does help me sort of take a look at this and say, yeah, it's probably improving more so than anything through my lens. But I do want to make sure that we don't have families who are moving into the community sort of fall through the cracks or lack that level of communication, because I know for sure I would have had my son participate in that.
Thank you, Leslie. And we did put in the notes last time as well that we'll have to follow up with staff on that to make sure that that late arrival, end of the school year folks don't miss out on the early communication.
We're out of time here for 10 minutes.
All right. So having heard nobody mention flourishing, I mean, we heard other synonymous words, but not hearing flourishing. What I have heard is improving. So let's do a fist to 5 on calling this improving. And then if I could call on you, Mel, to be the eyes again, because I can only see 5 people.
Gina, do we want to do it on the video or do we want to put it into the chat? I don't know for the phone folks if chat's a good option.
I will
So
say
far it has been working to do video, is that?
on my screen, I can see everyone all at once. So I think I can manage that.
Gina, can you clarify what we're voting on?
Yes, so we are calling criteria 1, element E, which is on the screen, improving. So if you agree to place it on the continuum of improving. Thanks for asking, Monique.
I'm not seeing everyone's hand. Okay. Okay, cool. All right, now I see everyone. Okay, we got 4s and 5s.
Okay. And in the past, that has meant consensus. So great. Thank you, everybody. And Allison will note that we have finished our first criteria entirely. Yay! If you guys were my students, I would make you stand up and dance, but I won't do that to you. Okay. All right. And
You should totally do
anyway.
that.
Voluntary dancing. I like it. Okay. So we'll take another peek at criteria 2 and the gaps that we identified in our understanding. So Tim, take it away.
Yes, and again, to keep this moving, I wasn't here for that conversation on these criteria. So I'm going off the notes, and I suspect this may be similar to the previous one where we add some information in, and that information may lead to additional questions, and we can continue to work at that. But as I thought about it, and I'm not sure if we've shared this with you before, and in a normal year, we would have done the 18-19 last spring, and I would be getting ready to wrap up the 19-20 right now. This is the backward looking report, but the pandemic's interrupted our series. So I'm going to bring, if Gina, you could click on that student achievement report link.
Yes, and before we do that, I just want to clarify, I'm going to go back a few.
Yes.
Just so that people can see as a reminder which parts of criteria 2 we are specifically revisiting, because there are the majority of this section we have finished. What we have remaining is students have access to developmentally appropriate practices and instruction, enhanced by educators' access to regular job-embedded professional learning opportunities. And D, the learning community in our schools provides various means to accommodate, scaffold, and enrich instruction for students with diverse needs, such as language-rich instruction, universal design for learning, positive behavior instruction. I defined those for everyone last time. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm feeling. And
our alphabet soup.
All right, so now.
Yeah,
You
and don't click on
top
the
one?
link quite yet, if you
Okay.
would, Gina. I do want to check for understanding with the group to make good use of time. As I read the notes, part of it was what practices are occurring, but I also caught in the notes from that meeting questions around are we seeing, particularly at the high school where kids have electives and their different pathways, how does the mix of students look in terms of different program participation opportunities? And I think behind that was a thinking that if we saw gaps, that could suggest that these 2 criteria were not as present as we would like them to be. So before we get deep into this, I want to see would it be helpful as part of this to kind of look at some of our program participation data? Because if it is, we'll do it. And if it isn't, we won't do it. This would be, for example, how does participation in AP courses or algebra and above at 8th grade, how do they compare across some different groupings? Would that help us with these criteria? If not, we can kind of dive back into the conversation. So Diane's got a thumbs up. Maybe a fist to 5. If you think it would be helpful, rank up towards the 4 or 5. If you don't think it's helpful, not. Mike, I see your hand.
Sorry, I was trying to see if I had a thumbs up on my phone in the chat. I apologize.
Okay. Okay, I see Brian with a 5. Mike with a 5. I see a fair number of fingers. So we'll go into this, but try to be a little parsimonious. Gina, if you would so kindly open that PDF up. It's the second link, and scroll down to start at page 15.
Hey, Tim, I had started timing you for 5 minutes, but you're already at 2.5. Would you like me to restart that for you for 5 minutes?
Nope, I'm gonna try to plow through.
Okay.
Thank you, Nia. All right, you said 15, Tim?
15, please.
Coming up. Thanks for
Okay, this
sharing
is
with
good.
me.
So one thing is we have several different math courses students can take at 8th grade. And one of our targets for some time has been to have, in general, our students taking algebra or higher in 8th grade. And so this looks at the 5 years with 17, 18 being our most recent. Again, if this weren't the pandemic, we would probably have 2 more years on here. But you can see the top line is all students. The second line is students of color. As we get larger and more diverse, we will be able to unpack this more. At the time this report was done, a choice in presenting the data was at an individual grade level in order to really have a solid denominator. We would have students of color being a group rather than unpacking it by more precise self-identifications. After that, we have low income, and then we have students with disabilities. So you can see that students of color and low income students, and most definitely students with disabilities, have a lower percentage of participation in algebra or higher as an 8th grade math course. So that's one data point right there. And if we could go down to the next page, Gina. And so then, and this report is on our website, and it's also in our data folder for our group, so you can peruse this more at your leisure. This just gives us the same tables broken down by the populations. If we could keep going, Gina. Another thing we do in this report is look at DF percentages and disaggregate those. This is the DF percentage for the middle school over the 5 years ending in that. And again, you can see elevated DF percentages for all of our groups of concern, most specifically for low income students at the middle school. And the table, you've got a master table, and then the next page will show you the tables for each of the groups we look to disaggregate on. So you can see how those percentages compare to the population overall.
I'm sorry.
Are we out of time?
But if you
Okay.
need more time, just wanted to give you a heads up though.
So Monique, I see your hand.
I have a question about the algebra, please, Tim. If you go back to the slide on algebra, are you saying if a student takes algebra in 8th grade, they will not take algebra at the high school? Because that's a pretty basic entry math class. So I'm confused on, is this the same algebra that they teach at the high school?
Yes.
So
So our model program, our standard on pace is most of our students take algebra in 8th grade. Most will take geometry in 9th grade and advanced algebra in 10th grade. So what we're looking at here are students that are taking algebra. If they're once accelerated, they'd be taking geometry in 8th grade. If they were twice accelerated, and that's very uncommon, but it does happen, they'd be taking advanced algebra in 8th grade.
I guess I'm just having a hard time understanding that our algebra classes are pretty full at the high school, yet you're saying that almost 90% of students in 2017 and 18 took algebra in middle school.
So if a student has a low pass, well, so one thing I would say is
They may be retaking it.
right.
Is
So
that the
students with a low pass, and we could bring this back at the next meeting, Monique. If a student has a low pass, the thinking is that they might benefit from a second introduction because algebra is a key gateway in 9th grade, but that would be a low pass situation. And one of the reasons we have algebra as the target in the 8th grade is we take the so-called fourth course, which in most districts would be pre-calculus. In our model, we unpack that into FST or function statistics and trigonometry as the lead course. And then the second course is pre-cal. So what we do, our model is algebra in 8th grade, unpack the fourth course for greater depth, because that is often a key fork in the road where students either go on to quantitatively based work beyond high school or not. So it's an intentional trade-off of where we put our sequencing. But that's more math curriculum. If we could, Diane, I see your hand.
Yeah, and this might be a parking lot, and this is partly based on personal experience. I'm wondering about the student population that transfers into the high school from other middle schools. And I will just, again, this is an N of one. We were met with, I felt attitude that Madison Metropolitan School District math wasn't good enough. And my daughter's teacher advocated for her so that she could enter. And I just thought, gee, you know, here's a kid that has a teacher that's willing to advocate for her. What about other kids that, you know, have done the work? And I'm speaking from a standpoint of higher education, where we have sort of changed the way we're thinking about entry of math and trying to not hold students back into lower maths if we think that they can be successful in a higher math with some supplemental instruction. So again, we're talking about algebra, you know, in 8th grade, and I realize that's sort of a unique piece for Waunakee and something that, you know, people are really proud of, that so many students enter in geometry. I just wonder, you know, again, who are those students? And are they just reflective of students in 8th grade that, you know, are at the border of passing, or does it include students coming from other districts? And then what does, you know, thanks for listening.
So we can do a data dive on that, and great parking lot question. And Diane, feel free to email me and set up a time so I can better understand the context there and the conversations that occurred.
Sure, and this is history. This is long history, years ago, so it's not a current thing. So things might have changed.
I was a history major as an undergraduate, Diane. So,
Yeah.
We're actually at 5 more minutes for kind of Q&A.
I know, we gotta.
So I'll throw in to add to the parking lot for Diane that there is also an issue. I know it's an issue for our English language students who have come to the high school not prepared for the curriculum in math that we have. The opposite problem exists, that we do not have standardized classes that are below algebra. Our students, many of our students who come to the high school who have had interrupted learning are not prepared for algebra. And it's a big headache for our EL department in order to provide appropriate math classes. So you kind of have it on both ends. So I just add that as another parking lot.
Yep. And so some other time, what I would say is, in the interest of time, if you go into this document in the data file, you will see what percentage of kids at the high school are in fine arts, are in world language, are in AP, take science in the 12th grade year, take social studies in the 12th grade year, high school DFs. You'll see our National Student Clearinghouse data about who continues on to higher education in the first and second year. You'll see our first year to second year college persistence rates disaggregated. That's all in that document that's linked to in the slide deck and is in our data folder.
All right. Thank you, Tim. Okay, so just as a quick reminder, our focus for these two elements is about providing various means to accommodate, scaffold, and enrich instruction. That S, I know it means instruction and not instructions. So sorry, I'm fixing it on the fly here, but for students with diverse needs. So this is the first question that we have in front of us. And this is the breakdown of how people voted in round one, now like months ago. So here we are, trying to place it on the continuum again. So would anyone like to speak to not a parent or emerging?
Starting 10-minute timer.
Thank you.
Leslie has had her hand up.
Go for it, Leslie.
So I tend to think that this still, I believe I actually voted of this being emerging element exists as written policy or practice, because it would be nice if we could look at this in a way that there's, as Monica has mentioned, there are students that could use perhaps preparatory courses or prep work. I know an example that I have that my son in high school, he ended up taking advanced algebra and geometry the same year. The counselor did encourage him not to do that. And one of the reasons was because he most likely should have been much more advanced in middle school, but the high school counselor encouraged him not to do it. It wasn't an easy decision because I didn't want him to set him up for failure, but he ended up doing extraordinarily well in both math classes. He did. I did ask the counselor at the time, is this common? And he did say that there are some students who find themselves taking, two math classes. And the reason why I asked that is because I was concerned if the individual's reaction was implicit bias, thinking that there's a Black kid who most likely couldn't handle the work. Of course, I'm a caring parent at the time, didn't want my child to set up for failure. My child felt very confident in his ability to do it, and he successfully did well in both courses. And so I say this because I think the breakdown came through with his math course selection in middle school. I think we didn't have to put him in a situation where he ended up having to take 2 math courses that one year. And as a result, he's in like calculus now. So, and doing still extraordinarily well. So, and to think this kid he's in humanities, he loves theater, but he does well in math. I got to talk to this kid because he can make a lot of money in the sciences or something. But yeah. So I say this, that emerging, it's kind of like where I'm landed. And that's my recommendation. We need to start thinking about prep courses or some type of pre-assessment to identify kids who may be more advanced or who may need the additional work and support.
Okay. And that gets at both the accommodating and scaffolding instruction. So thank you, Leslie. Are there other hands? Okay. Last call for not a parent or emerging discussion. So perhaps people have been swayed. I don't know. This looks like a big near majority, and we've just heard one voice. Monique, I saw your hand.
I'll just make a positive plug at the high school. I can't speak for the other schools. So, for about 10 years now, when I started as an EL paraeducator, to where we are now. I think that at the high school, and I'm going to stick with my emerging also, because I feel as if, you know, the accommodating and the scaffolding and the diverse needs used to fall a lot upon special ed department, EL department, whatever interventionist there was, that it was like our job to scaffold, to change. And I wish Stephanie was here today so she could talk from the EL or special ed perspective.
I'm here,
seen
Monique.
change.
Yes.
Oh, you are here,
Yeah.
Stephanie. Yay. Thank you. So please add on. I think that I've seen a change in the 10 years. I see more co-teaching. I see more collaboration. We are not, in my opinion, at improving and flourishing on that end, but I have seen a good change in the understanding that students belong to everybody, not just one department. But it's still a challenge. I mean, they look to us to like make the accommodations, and we really need it to be coming from the core teachers so that we can then go from there. But it has definitely been emerging in the 10 years I've been there. So I just wanted to make a positive about that.
Thank you, Monique. And Nia reminds us we have about 5 minutes. Are
Well,
there
I feel like
Nia? Stephanie, go ahead. Yeah.
I feel like I should speak now since I was unknown that I was present. I would agree with what Monique has said. I am a special ed teacher at the high school, and in the 14 years that I've been here, I have also seen growth in more collaboration and approaching how to intervene with these kids at different stages, whether they are a struggling student or already identified as either an English learner or special ed or whatever it may be. I think there has been a tremendous amount of growth and collaboration that has occurred. And so we kind of can feed off of each other and learn from each other. And so I would agree with Monique that it has been positive growth for sure in the time that I've been here as well.
I see Mike with his hands up. Thank you, Stephanie.
And I would echo what the two previous folks said, just based on the percentages that Tim shared. There's clearly a gap. And so I think there's definitely things that are happening. There are kids of color in those classes, but nowhere near, except for the 1 year, to the level of other groups, or specifically the white majority group.
So we've heard a lot of emerging, and again, when we compare to what we just talked about, we just placed something that we heard lots of positives about at improving. And so I'm getting a sense from what we've heard in our discussion today, as well as our vote last time, that we're leaning not towards improving, but towards emerging.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other final things to add to this before we vote?
I think we are at emerging here. My personal view is, and I think it's maybe a little more pronounced at the secondary level, and that's just partly because the way lagging skills may present at the secondary level. But I think a challenge at it, something you often see with supports in lower grades, is a lot more fluidity as supports can be brought on, and then as the student progresses, you can modify the level of support. At the secondary level, we still are very wedded to semester by semester course, and that really isn't very nimble and really doesn't adequately give us the ability to be more responsive to where the student is at. And so I think we're definitely emerging.
All right, so hearing that, let's do a fist to 5. And again, we are voting on marking this element of criteria 2 as emerging.
Mike does have his hand up if he wanted to
Okay.
say anything.
Sorry, pause. Mike, real quick. Go ahead.
I'm super sorry. I'm using it on my phone and I forgot to take my hand down. I'm sorry to waste everybody's time.
No worries. Okay, so fist to 5 on emerging. And then Mel, if you would. Be our eyes.
Oh, just waiting on a couple more hands. All right, 4s and 5s, nothing below.
Okay.
Good
Right.
job. We have 30 seconds to spare.
Wow, look at us. We are indeed improving.
Good stuff.
Okay. All right. So we have then our final element, which is D. The learning community in our school provides various means to, is that what we just did? No, it's not. I just read it before. Right? Or did I do this
I
backwards?
think that's what we just voted on.
Okay, so I'll just go backwards in the slides. Sorry, thank you. Students have access to developmentally appropriate practices and instruction enhanced by educators' access to regular job-embedded professional learning opportunities. I don't remember from the notes what the questions were about this. I'm not sure we heard any new data in this area from Tim. So Tim, do you have anything brief to add?
So I wasn't present at the last meeting, but I'm going by the notes.
Yep.
And it appeared to me from the notes that, and again, it was very important to have a conversation about that, I would assume, in the now. But there was a discussion around the big event that happened in our neighbor Sun Prairie. And it looked to me in the notes that a lot of the conversation threaded in concepts of cultural responsiveness and implicit bias into the discussion, which is very important when we talk about practices and instruction. But those are explicitly addressed in some of our items in criteria 3. So I think, you know, from my lens, the criteria 2 is really looking more at individual learning styles, having responsiveness in instruction to a student's developmental level at that point in time, and matching the instruction to what the learner needs right then, more than issues of bias and cultural competence, which we will be turning to in our next criteria. So
would it be helpful for folks to see if they feel that those things are best fit? I can fast forward to criteria 3.
Right. And what I was thinking about here is, you know, when we look at E1 and 2, that very much is speaking directly to issues of culturally responsive. Well, they use the term culturally relevant here, but implicit bias, all of that. We've got 2 indicators specifically in that zone.
Okay. So I would agree from the notes, there were lots of questions around that area. So do people feel like they have enough information knowing that that will be included in the future to make a decision on criteria 2? Or are there further questions about more information people need? And keeping in mind that we are hoping to wrap this part of the agenda up soon.
Diane has her hand raised.
Thank you, Katie.
I might have missed it because I did have to leave the last meeting earlier, or it might be another meeting, but I thought we had a conversation around, somebody was talking about community of practices that were there and how departments worked to sort of address changes to curricula and that. So maybe somebody, I'm just trying to like bring it out of my brain to remember what the answers were to that. And I thought that was helpful to our discussion, and maybe it kind of brought us to the resolve to, but I can't remember if somebody was going to check more on that, or if people felt like that was addressed.
Let me see if the notes are helpful here. This is C, right?
I think there was question around like what professional development opportunities are there for staff. Like in the second, when you're looking at it, Gina, that second column, like specifics on professional
Okay.
development opportunities. And people said specifically around race, diversity, equity. How are these incorporated in different subject matters?
And so it seems to me that what Tim highlighted there with those upcoming parts of criteria 3, that's certainly something we'll be discussing with staff in that survey. I'm trying to see if there were.
I mean, it's just my perspective, but when I read the prompts for this indicator, my mind turns to the example Monique provided. So, you know, when we have a student who comes to us with interrupted learning for whatever reason, and they are not on level with, say, our lowest generally provided math course at the high school, Algebra 1. What are our practices to meet that student's needs? And to what extent are we preparing our educators to support those situations? When I think about this is that's the type of situation I envision. Or to put it in an elementary perspective, when Bethany, for example, has a student coming into her classroom that's reading well below the typical level for her grade, which I think is first grade.
Yes.
How, you know, what's in Bethany? I mean, I'm using Bethany as an example, but she, you know, what's in her toolkit to do that? And then how do we support our teachers in having, you know, instructional practices and resources to support meeting the students that might not fit kind of the middle target of instruction. That's how this one reads to me.
Okay. And Nia notes that the 5 minutes is up, and then we'll have 10 minutes for discussion. Are there any other questions?
Leslie has her hand raised.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. So this is, so we're not ready. Okay, so I need to come back when it's ready for discussion. My
Okay.
apologies.
No worries. We're almost there.
And thank you, Tim, for that explanation. That's what I assumed, but you gave it some more clarity. Thank you.
All right. Any other follow-up questions before we discuss where to place it? Okay, then Leslie, jump in.
So based on the data that was shared earlier by Tim, I definitely don't see this as improving. And that would be my, personally, I don't see this as improving, only because simply look at the data that we did see with middle school related to students of color, disabilities. It just doesn't fully represent what this, I mean, it just, what this should be. I mean, it just doesn't really say much. I mean, from the data there, and that's just, and actually, Tim, you just showed us a little snapshot of that. So you know, I actually may be quite generous by saying emerging, but I see it between not apparent and emerging.
Thank you. Other hands? Any other discussion about not apparent or emerging?
I see Mel's hand is up.
Mel's hands is raised.
Thank you. I would agree with emerging. My perspective is just bringing voice to like our early literacy students, so kindergartners, first graders, and I wonder about the term developmentally appropriate. And personally, I just am curious about balanced literacy's approach and the fact that we are now investigating supplementary explicit phonics instruction to our current literacy practices, kind of recognizing that we really need to be more explicit in that instruction at those early ages to help our early readers really understand decoding, breaking words down, sounding them out, blending them back together. So personally, I think we have an awareness that we're not quite where we want to be, and we're working towards that. So I would agree that we're certainly not improving or flourishing. I think there's some work to do with our early literacy students on developmental appropriateness.
Stephanie has her hand raised.
I put my hand down, but I forgot to unmute myself. Sorry. I would agree that we are at emerging, speaking from a secondary level too, based on what Tim said and what other people have said in my own personal experience. I do think that we are definitely more in an emerging state. Not that we don't address it, but I don't know that we always have the best strategies or approaches to addressing it or things in place. So I would definitely say we're emerging as well.
Thank you, Stephanie. Other hands? Okay, so that was for not apparent and emerging. Would anyone like to speak to improving or maybe not flourishing, because that's a small slice of this pie, but we'll open it up to both.
We're at 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Mia.
I'm just gonna, speak that, I do believe we're at emerging. I think it sometimes can be challenging as professional educators, particularly ones that take their profession and their work with students as diligently as, in my experience, our staff do here. That, if you're well trained and you're learning the right things, how can I not be in this tier? But I think when we just look at the results, it's clear that we have a ways to go yet, despite everybody's best efforts. And that's really where we as a system need to focus. Where do we need to add resources? Where do we need to add more targeted professional learning?
Thanks, Tim. Any other hands? Okay, so again, I've heard emerging as the emerging theme here. I'm sorry, it's getting late. This is what I do at this hour. So let's fistify it. Where are we at? Emerging for criteria 2.
For those, I can see currently 4s and 5s.
Okay, thank you. All right, criteria 2, done.
3 minutes to spare. Good job.
All right. So we just wanted to speak before we conclude this portion of the agenda about our next steps. We mentioned before that we are putting the brakes a little bit on criteria 3, just in order to make sure that our staff have an opportunity to really use their voice in this area while there's a lot else that's going on. So we would like to propose that we come back to criteria 3 and begin taking things out of order. So we would like to take a look at things that the committee members feel comfortable with. And there was a suggestion that criteria 6 would be a really great fit for this group. So I'm just gonna slow motion go through what's left. We've got criteria 3, which focuses on climate and teaching and learning. We've got all students have access to capable qualified educators. Schools maintain accountability by utilizing multiple indicators to assess student achievement, instructional effectiveness, and school performance. And then 6 is where we thought we might want to head next with this group. Schools engage with families and communities to collaborate in learning, advocacy, and securing resources. And then the final criteria is all schools are sufficiently and equitably funded to provide the resources and supports required to meet all students' needs. So we're kind of just looking for permission to take things out of order. And then we're wondering about a timeline, because we know that there's starting to be a sense that this will never end. And we don't want people to feel like we're not going anywhere. So if people want to speak to just taking a look at a couple and then digging in and then coming back to the audit, we're all ears. But we would like to propose pushing forward and just making sure that this process gives us a sense of direction of what we need to focus on as a committee. That's, after all, why we launched this effort in the first place. But we're open to suggestions. So if people would raise hands to give us a sense of direction. Nia.
Hey,
one of the people on my screen. Go for it.
Yeah, sorry. But I don't know if because we have I really appreciate the hard work that you're doing with Gina. I do know that is very important, but it's definitely also time consuming. Would it be possible to set up some sort of like poll to say, okay, here are the criterias. We vote ahead of time so that we come here, we could just do the exercise that we're doing now, which seems to go a lot faster than us like one meeting, a vote, a month later talking about it. If the votes are there ahead of time, we can just go in and jump in and talk about it. And there could be an option to ask questions where the questions where everyone can see and you guys can answer so that we can be prepared. Just an answer. I know that requires a lot more work on your parts and everyone who's doing that, but it might help us move along a little bit faster.
So would you mean that the information part would come out in advance of the form to vote?
Right. You know how we're doing like, okay, you were going to the Google form or voting ahead of time. You were voting and then you're like gathering that data. Yeah. We can want to do that ahead of time. And then we can also have, and then people have a lot of questions about like, oh, well, what does this mean? And if our meeting is in the next month here, then perhaps we can just get that done ahead of time. And you'll have to excuse my kids are in the screen now. So,
How fast?
so yeah, that, yes. Yeah, mom.
Okay, other thoughts?
I like that concept. I would say if we were to do that and accelerate the process, as I look at the criteria, the ones that I think are, and again, it's just my linear thinking, the ones that are the most objective where we could rapidly pull together some data and let you evaluate would probably be 4 and 5. I think, and that is in the area of highly qualified educators. And then 5 is assessment and accountability and measures. And I think we might be able to, I would certainly be interested in hearing what the other folks have been working hard on the audit process thing. But I think even with everything that's going on, we could pull that together in fairly short order and get that out.
Okay. Other thoughts? And perhaps reactions to the idea of previewing 4 and 5 with a pre-vote, and then during the meeting just have discussion. All right, there seems to be, oh, Mel. there seems to be some agreement with that.
We do have some hands up.
Hands
Okay,
raised.
okay, thank you. I can't see.
Leslie and Diane have their hand raised that I
All
can
right.
see.
So yeah, I actually like the idea that Nia has presented. Thank you so much for making that recommendation. And I also like the idea that Tim presented. Perhaps maybe we can review 4 and 5 and move forward from there. I think that that is definitely the route to take, so we don't have to spend so much time in our meetings. And then perhaps maybe instead of 10 minutes, we leave it up to maybe 15 minutes or so to discuss, or have open discussion just in case there's more questions, or maybe 12 minutes or something.
Great.
Mhm.
Okay, and then was it Diane?
Yeah, and I echo what's just been said, and I observe that in 5, I might advocate for doing that one first, because there's an important element. Educators have timely access to student data and assessment results. And so I'm wondering a couple of things. First of all, we already know that obviously there's a lot of data being kept. And so I think we already have some information that helps us process criteria 5, especially if we're doing it ahead of time and, ahead of the meeting. And then if we can get through 5, I think some of that information will also help us sort of propel through some of the other information, because I know if I know the answer to, that C, educators have timely access to student data, then that helps me understand a whole bunch of other, pieces in terms about, curriculum and opportunities and whatnot for students. So that if I could, it might be good to do 5 first.
Okay. So again, 3 is on hold. Here's 4. And Tim, were you suggesting that perhaps we could do 2 in 1? Because there's a lot of elements, and so that part makes me nervous, but.
Well, there are a lot of elements, but for example, and I'll keep this super quick, when I look at 4 of these elements,
The data is pretty straightforward.
Many of these things are yes or no. There are some judgment aspects to 4, but I think we could bring data in to kind of frame that quickly. Now for 5, again, when I look at this, most of these are fairly straightforward, yes or no. And again, I think areas where judgment would be involved, we could fairly easily bring information in to help clarify the situation. And, one thing I'll observe about 5 is we actually, by the way state and federal authorities look at it, we don't even have any D2s. So that's an element we really won't be addressing.
Okay. And perhaps we can leave it up to the committee to feel out once we collect this data. If we feel like it can happen in 1, then we'll share both at the same time. If we think that might not be possible, then we could consider Diane's suggestion of starting with 5 rather than 4.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. If anyone has any other suggestions about how we move forward or reconsider how we're moving forward, let's hear from you, because we're just making it up as we go along here. So.
All right. Did we conclude 6D then on that one? All right.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brian.
Yeah, so let's move on to recommendations to the board regarding issues of immediate concern. Under that is 7A, recommendations on offerings of PD, professional development, and/or training for staff to address events or incidents of bias and bigotry. So I know for me, I don't know what professional development that you have going on right now and what has been planned, and if there's the programs out there. So Tim, maybe you could shed some light on what is currently being offered through what programs and.
Yeah, so I think, and I know Mel has been someone who's brought a good perspective on this, and she had to leave for a situation, but we have covered this a bit before. I think where we are at is we do have a framework that we have presented to most of our staff, which is the Speak Up at School, but it has been really a one-time presentation, and we have not put in place a careful approach to building on previous learning, potentially having some scenario-based aspects to kind of build on the base. And we just don't have it built into our annual as something that we have to touch on annually. And I think to really make enduring progress in this area, we're going to have to, one, do more than we've done with Speak Out. And I also think the staff on here will know we've got a big packet of required training we have every year, and we have to acknowledge it. And I do think we don't have a lot in there around reporting incidents of bias and bigotry. And I think that's something we need to address for this August. So I don't know if that's kind of, you know, what you were looking for, Brian, but I think based on our previous conversations, I think those are two key things we could be charged to focus on as a district over the next few months.
Yeah,
My
I
perspective.
think some of the comments that I've heard through talking with Joel and other people too is sort of what immediate action or what steps of action is taken when these issues arise, and when the administration sort of sees repeated offenses happening over and over again, what the policy is, and what type of action and training do not just the staff, but do the kids receive any, I guess, training. And I revert back to what we would do at an NCAA institution with alcohol and drug offenses. They go to actual training and to learn more about drugs and the effect of drugs and how it affects other people and stuff, the negativity and stuff. You know, what is the process, I guess, at the school? Do we have that set up for students that have repeated offenses, or what is the action plan for teachers and administration when these things happen?
So let me see. Katie, I don't know if you're still live here to speak to this from a building perspective. If you are, turn on so I know.
There she is.
Yes. We typically follow a process of investigating the situation first by speaking to all parties involved. And then at an elementary level, we always involve parents, as it's a little bit different when it's at the high school level, depending on the severity and the number of times that maybe this has happened. We would also involve police if it is needed. Obviously informing parents when that involvement is happening. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, and is that a common pattern throughout the district, or does each school set their own tolerance and action plan?
That's not something that we've necessarily discussed across district, as this would be more what Prairie has followed. I will say I would assume that the other elementary and even intermediate principals follow the same pattern. We just had an incident with kind of siblings that were at the intermediate school and at Prairie, and intermediate's administration followed that exact same protocol as we did.
Yeah, I would say, Brian, from my perspective, accounting for some developmental differences based on age, there's a fairly similar approach across levels once you account for that. But to a point you raised, I think there is some reteaching of behavior that occurs for what I would call maybe minor events, but for a more major event, would a student be a standard practice put into a substantial reteaching program? That may happen in some isolated instances, but that is not a standard practice.
I will say that we, depending on the developmental level, even at like a K to a 4, we would look at, opportunities for teaching through literature, teaching through, we had an incident a year or two ago, and we brought in a whole bunch of different books, and then led discussions with the students around those types of books, because it was like an ability type of situation that happened. We'd also lead restorative practice circles, where we would get kids together and have common understandings within these circles, led with apologies. There may be further consequences, like a separation or a stopping of, riding the bus, let's say, or engaging in specific resource activities until the situation is resolved, if that makes sense.
Are there any holes in the professional development that you think we need to address and be filled sooner than later?
Right on the spot, we do the speak up and that language like Tim had addressed. I think that a constant refreshers and practice in that area is needed, because I'm not sure that staff have complete comfort around addressing things right away in the spot with all type of situations, that processing maybe needs to happen in order for them to know how to address it. And that's going to come with time and practice, right? We don't become, that doesn't become innate until we practice it. So one of our thoughts, actually, Speak Up has a whole bunch of like scenario videos and things like that that you can do. We initially had it planned out to happen at Prairie, this is in April and May, professional development within our staff meetings using those resources. Due to the change that happened last night, our staff meetings are going to be used a little bit different over the next couple months. So like we have this initiative or this purpose to go forward and use that. But I think that the more we can get staff talking around these scenarios, the better.
And Gina, I see your hands up. Thank you, Katie. And then Monique.
I would just say that outside of the single training conversation around Speak Up at School, I've literally never heard that discussion happen at my building ever at all. I've also never had any training at the district level about how to respond. I mean, Speak Up at Schools is teaching adults and kids how to speak up when we hear words that are biased. It is not about how to, as a teacher, work through conflict with students. When Katie talks about restorative circles and restorative justice practices, I literally have never heard those words used ever in the district at my level, nor have I seen any training about that. I have sought that out on my own and through WEAC, but it's not a part of our conversation at my building at all.
Okay,
so I would just say that Katie's certainly representing her experience, but it doesn't match what mine is.
So I will say that Prairie might be a little bit further along in this journey than the other elementary schools due to trainings that we had offered last year and the year before, around Ross Green, around restorative practices, led by Kate Bloom, myself, and some other people. Due to a student population that we were specifically trying to support, and our staff needed that training. And I think that that is something that other buildings are wanting and needing. It's finding time, balancing between here's instructional practice, here's behaviors and discipline, here's equity, here's all these things layered on top, and what is top priority this year. Top priority hasn't been set around those things. And we've also lost a lot of professional development days due to trainings that we've moved to the beginning of the school year. When we initially had planned, really the only thing that we still kept was Ross Green, which we had in January. Other than that, everything else has really been pushed kind of to the side or mentioned briefly due to the instructional practice or instructional environment that we're in right now, that we're still acting on. What technology training do staff need? What logistical planning are we doing? We're planning lunch and recess right now. These are things that that normally in a year, kids just go to the lunchroom because everyone knows how to do it. Right now, nobody knows how to do lunch. And those are things that, was taking our time at staff meetings and, communicating within PLCs. Just to be honest, where we're at, and I think that a lot of those things have been put on hold, not because it's not a priority, because it's just not a
Right,
fire.
no, I understand.
Yeah.
Who else had their hand up?
Monique, yeah.
And I would like to echo what Katie was saying so eloquently, and it was brought up, and I mean, now it's neither here nor there because the vote was made, but there was a lot of concern from the K to 6th grade teachers about the need for the call for bringing volunteers in to do support with lunches and playgrounds, because they mentioned that they have been trained on the different ways of working with students with conflicts and with behaviors, and to just bring in parents to see things and not be trained to understand the different theories that we're using in our school district is gonna, as one parent said, or one teacher said, parents are going to see things and, we're going to have some repercussions about what are we going to do about that. We've trained our staff. We spent a lot of money, a lot of time on those things. We do the same thing at the high school through our advisory, which will be going away too. So there's going to be a lot of issues with working with kids for proper behaviors at all grade levels, and how we're going to get back to that model of being appropriate, and how are we going to train our volunteers and new staff that are going to come in quickly to deal with these things, because we have set a pretty high bar for what we're expecting our teachers to do and our para educators to do when we see issues. And now we're bringing in brand new people at a very high anxiety moment for everybody.
Thank you. So I think what from I'm hearing is sort of how to deal with issues when they come up. You can learn theory and you can learn, all these things, but when something happens right in front of you, you need to be able to take an appropriate action. And I think from what I have heard of incidents within the school, the kids have, when they see a teacher not take action, that's when they get used to I get called that all the time, but the teachers don't do anything. And I'm thinking, I can't believe that the teachers, I think maybe they freeze. I think maybe there's this moment where it's like, they haven't been trained in this, what to do with this situation. So I think that's a hole that may be that we need to fill, because I think other students see this happening and they get either used to it or it becomes worse. So
and I agree with you, Brian. It's definitely a hole we need to correct, because it's as an administrator, I understand the conditions that have led to that. And I certainly understand all of our special conditions this year.
Yep.
But when you're a kid and something negative happens to you that's targeted towards you, and the authority figure, you know, again, not saying the intentions are, you know, they just were caught in the moment.
Right.
When the authority figure doesn't step in, that can really diminish your feeling of safety and belonging in the space. And so I understand why we're where we're at, but I think this is an area for next year we really need to hit hard.
Anyone else have a comment before we move on? All right, well, thank you. And then the last thing on the agenda was, and again, Mike put this on here, I believe, Mike and Joel, but sort of a dedicated reporting system or policy for events of bias and bigotry within the district. I think people have talked about this earlier on.
Yeah, I can speak to this. Joel and I are working on our first draft, and I would say the next time we meet, we'll have it ready. We've got some examples. We have one example where we're setting up in Qualtrics, and we're going to kind of tool around with it, and then we'll kind of bring it in and look for your feedback as a group on it. Is it kind of hitting the mark? And you know, with the understanding that it's the first installment and we can continue to refine it, but we'd like to field it this year.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think you might be able to have a copy or a draft before the next meeting for people to see?
I think since we have spring break in between now and then, it's highly likely, even with reopening going on.
Let Joel work on it.
Joel and I are working on it together, and Joel puts up with me, but I've got a great partner.
Right. So. Anybody have any comments about what they would like to see or questions for Tim about what's on it, maybe from a high level at this point? Okay. I think we're all tired.
But
So
Brian, before we move to adjourn, I just have a question about the board's action last night in terms of our recommendation that came forward from this group. So for those of you who missed that part of the meeting that ended on my iPad in the dark at 11:30 p.m. The board voted to move that discussion to a district or a school board committee, the goals committee. So they did not immediately take action on the recommendation to remove the imagery from the old gym. It became a larger conversation about the part where we began a larger conversation and where this group said, we're not ready to have, there needs to be this larger conversation, but here's a concrete first step. And so I just wanted to know if you have any insight into, the process moving forward with that first step we made, because I have to admit, I was a bit disappointed that, certainly recommendations are going to come from this group and they don't all have to be rubber stamped. That's not what I'm suggesting, but that we had some discussion in our group about what would be like a right now goal and what would be a more long-term goal. And it just feels like now it's going to be in another committee and it's going to.
Well, the committee that I referred it to has Dave, Mike, and me. So Mike and I both sit on this committee. Dave has connections with Ho Chunk and has worked with them in the leadership for many years in other things. And so we felt instead of, we all knew that this is a community and people look at it differently depending on who you are. And we knew that coming in, and I applaud you guys for taking action to get us started on this discussion. Tim brought up too that the village as a whole is working with the Ho Chunk on recognizing their ancestry in this area. And so while we sort of took it to goals committee to see if there was a way to be able to greater use what we have for imagery in the district as an educational purpose and as an honor, and to honor them as being the first in the area. And so we want to continue that discussion on, removing it from the gym, but maybe putting part of it, some of it, all of it in an area where we are going to also put other educational items of the Ho-Chunk Nation to be able to honor them within the school district. So that's where we sort of had taken it.
Okay. And there was some mention about, getting input from others. And so I was curious if you have
I
any
can
idea what
speak
that.
to that. I mean, the vote we took at that meeting, if it were to happen today, would no longer be a unanimous vote. Not necessarily in terms of ultimate outcome, but in terms of inclusion and dialogue. Joel's not able to be here tonight, but Joel wanted me to share some of his perspectives around it. And it kind of gets to the idea that we can't be inclusive in policy if we're not inclusive in practice. And, I was part of the unanimous vote, and I understand the research, and I fully understand the concerns. A factor is that, we do have, we have 2 members of our district staff who are tribal members. Both are at the high school, one of whom teaches in the location where that painting is. Neither were asked to be included in the discussion, and that has been noted. And they are feeling, as Native American staff members, that they were excluded. Again, not with malice, but it's the way it happened. And they would love to be more included in the conversation. And I know certainly from Joel's perspective, whether it happens at the goals committee or here in some other venue, I know Joel feels very strongly that we need to make sure we get more voices around the table on this. Again, not necessarily that our the overall goal of, both honoring but creating safe environments is respected, but definitely we would like our local staff included in the conversation. I know, Monique, you sent an email to our group a few days ago relating to this. Obviously you've got a right to pass, but I don't know if you want to kind of build on that email.
I'll just say that I was approached by a staff member who took me to the old gym and explained to me why the staff member felt that that imagery was appropriate, and I listened and I learned. I'm not sure that I've changed my opinion, but I respectfully listened, and if there's opportunity for more dialogue, I'm certainly open to having more dialogue. As a committee, I don't think we ever felt that there was not going to be dialogue. We were asked to make a vote on what we felt about it, and we did at the time, but I don't really think that we thought that our decision was a binding decision, that there was going to be action taken upon that, just because we made that vote, that all of a sudden all the imagery would go away. I think it was more the concept of what are we going to do with this and how are we going to use it in appropriate ways. So I felt comfortable with the conversation. I listened, I learned, and I'm certainly willing to keep my ears open and move forward.
And the movement of this from this committee to the goals committee is, the goals committee is formed pretty much by a board and administration. So we know how this committee feels. We're still gonna have open dialogue for you to, contribute to what you feel, to listen to what other people are saying, to sort of listen to long-term goals. Again, Tim, I don't know if you want to take just a minute to tell what the village is doing with the Ho-Chunk Nation. And I think it's a great lead into something we can sort of be a part of as well.
Yeah, just real briefly, and I'm going to keep it brief because Some of the undergraduates that are working on this project would really like to come in and present to this committee, either a next meeting or the meeting after that. But the village is part of the celebration of the sesquicentennial. Waunakee is going to be 150 years old this year. Is working with the university. They've got a program called University, with a C instead of the S, that promotes community learning projects. And so the village is partnering with the UW and the Ho-Chunk Nation on a variety of projects to recognize, as part of the sesquicentennial year, that Waunakee is on Ho-Chunk land, and raise the visibility of the Ho-Chunk history, the story, the culture. And this is in a variety of formats. I think there are 5 projects. One of them does relate to the school. We are going to have a culturally responsive workshop sometime in June, specifically to deal with cultural responsiveness on Native American issues. And there's some other things, but they're mainly in the vein of elevating the Ho-Chunk story within our community because of where we are and where our land's history has been, and also looking at adding land acknowledgements similar to what we've talked about in committee, perhaps not only in the schools, but in other community institutions around the village. That's the super high level. Looking forward to bringing more information into a future meeting.
Great, thank you. That was really helpful.
Okay. So future meetings, there seems to be one scheduled for April 1st. Am I right, Rebecca?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, at 6 p.m. So without anything left on the agenda, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn from.
Can I get a second?
Sure.
I second. Christy Schaufelman.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you for another long meeting. Tim, go to bed.
Actually, one thing, I know we're adjourned, but one thing you'll be seeing from Rebecca is another scheduling email, because I know that Joel has something that's coming up that's going to impact his attendance on Tuesdays, and he's the co-chair. So we're going to look at some options and see if we can find some happy dates.
Okay. The next meeting's on a Thursday, so hopefully he'll be able to be on that one. Then we'll look forward to it. So, all right, everyone. Thank you for your time, and have a good evening.
Thanks.
Great job, Brian. Thanks for the pinch hit.